Now, in the latest escalation in the global trade war, US President Donald Trump declared an additional 25% tax on all steel and aluminum imports into the United States. In this next report, we dive into the implications of Trump's tariffs on Asia. Take a look.
The new US administration has walked the walk on tariffs. Trump's universal tariffs of 25% on aluminum and steel is the latest. Within Asia, Vietnam appears most exposed to tariffs on steel and aluminum. Tariffs on steel and aluminum are not new. They were initially introduced during Trump's first presidency in 2018. If we assume that Trump is following the same strategy, these tariffs could likely be used as leverage in trade negotiations. Vietnam exports more steel by value to the US than China. This is because Vietnam buys large quantities of semi-processed steel from China, processes it, and then re-exports it to the rest of the world. While steel tariffs are likely directed towards China, Vietnam's economy appears most exposed in Asia. Its steel plus aluminium exports to the US were 0.3% of its GDP in 2024. Another country that ranks higher in its exposure to steel and aluminium exports to the US is South Korea. In 2018, Korea was granted a tariff-free export quota by the US. However, recent Korean exports to the US have been below this quota. While it's uncertain whether Trump will remove the quota system, it appears that South Korea has some negotiating leverage. When we look at the broader impact of Trump's America First trade policy on Asia, it's clear the impact on some sectors and countries will be greater than others. Overall, countries with a larger share of external demand in GDP growth will be impacted more, not just by direct tariffs but also by the uncertainty of global trade. This will deter cross-border investments and future capacity increases. North Asian countries including China, Japan, Korea and Taiwan are the most exposed compared to South Asian giants like India and Southeast Asian economies like the Philippines. However, growing dependence on China suggests indirect impact on tariffs on ASEAN are likely to be large. ASEAN economies are highly linked to China, with deep trade and investment ties driven by various trade agreements. China is ASEAN's largest and fastest growing source of imports. It accounted for nearly 26% of ASEAN's total imports in 2024, a significant increase from the 16% share a decade ago. However, ASEAN stands to benefit significantly as businesses adopt the China Plus One strategy. Business Bureau, WION, World is One.
And for more on this, we're joined by Mithali Nikor, economist and founder of Nikor Associates, live from New Delhi. Welcome to the broadcast, Mithali. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Now, of course, Indian stocks sold off again on Trump's tariffs, despite a pullback in the broader stock markets. To begin with, what's your take on this?
So, Hema, we've been studying the trends of FII and FPI pullouts across emerging markets. And in fact, you'd be interested to know what I found most interesting in my research was that FPI pullouts are not restricted to just emerging markets. This is also being seen in a number of developed economies. The UK, for instance, in the last 3 months has seen an FPI pullout of nearly $435 million compared to India's FPI pullout of $405 million, US dollars. So I think there's a clear movement of the foreign portfolio investors back to safety, if we will, back to US equities, if we will. And, at this point in time, the trends are fairly clear in terms of saying it's time to park your money in US denominated and US government-backed securities and equity funds.
Right, Mithali. Of course, we were also tracking Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States. And something that really stood out to me was that US President Donald Trump, just an hour ahead of his meeting, said that, it's really difficult to do business in India because they have some of the highest tariffs. That's something that was reiterated in their press briefing. as well. Now, my question is, with Trump's reciprocal tariffs likely to come in April, of course, they're not in effect right now, what is your view on its impact on the Indian markets?
So I think it's a very interesting, visit that Prime Minister Modi was able to engineer, and I think it's a big win for him. Because if you think about it, the first and biggest announcement that happened after the visit, and the reciprocal tariff, of course, came before the visit, the discussion. But after the visit, the entire conversation was the $500 billion trade deal, to say that we have to take, India-US trade to a level of nearly $500 billion by 2030 from its current level of $129 billion today. And of course, not all of this will be based on India's exports to the US. A lot of, concessions and I would say areas of mutual cooperation agreed on, so that US oil and gas purchases should happen from India. India is the second largest consumer of energy in the world. So definitely it's in the US interest if we purchase their energy. And then on the other hand, also talking about the defense sector and the fact that defense sales have to happen, India, to be given access to F-35s. All of this put together means that somewhere there's a room for negotiation and to avoid the reciprocal tariffs if India gets its own trade agreement with the US. But obviously, India will have to work overnight and nights, till April to actually, put some sort of contours of this deal in place, and also work on, easing the tariff regime at a national level. And I think this is a reform that's long coming for even the Indian economy and can benefit the Indian economy. So I think all in all, a mixed picture, but more tilting towards a positive picture emerging.
All right, and that being said, for all the confusing market patterns from Trump's zero-sum attitude, it's complicating expectations on the impact, of course, which we've been discussing. So what's your outlook for global markets in the near term?
I think in the near term, it's fairly evident that, investors, especially FIIs and FPIs, I'm not talking about the FDI investors, but I'm talking about, your foreign institutional investors, the foreign portfolio investors who have certain short-term return requirements. They are, retreating to safety. They are moving to the US in large numbers. However, in the last 2 weeks, one market which has also picked up is actually China. And, we were seeing again in October to December, in the last quarter, Chinese investments were actually slowing down. FIIs, FPIs were pulling out. But now, that China has also imposed retaliatory tariffs on the US. I think a lot of international investors are seeing that China is ready to hold its own in a sort of trade war against the US. China actually exports nearly 16.5% of, the US import basket. So if goods from China become more expensive, it hurts the US consumer as well. And, in fact, the US does not export as much to China. So in a trade war between US and China, a lot of investors sort of saying, can China actually emerge on top? And I think that's why a lot of investment flow also going back into the Chinese market. But for the Indian market, really, unless we start to see an improvement in the domestic, domestic growth rates and again, looking at more reforms, it will be difficult to attract the investors back in the short term.
All right. Well, Mithali, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast with your insights on this. For latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.